Sri Ramana Paravidyopanishad, the supreme science of the self as taught by Sri Ramana. Since multiplicity is experienced only in the state of ignorance, it is declared to be unreal. On the other hand, because the unity of the self is experienced on the liquidation of ignorance, that unity is real. It may be questioned, if ignorance is total darkness, how can anything be experienced in this state? The explanation is that this ignorance is not like perfect darkness, but like a greatly diminished light. In dim light, a rope is not invisible. It is merely perceived wrongly as a snake. In the same way, in ignorance, what is real, the self, is not invisible. It is mistakenly taken to be the world. The reality is only that which survives in the supreme state. The sole reality is that peaceful self which shines by the light of its own nature as pure consciousness in the supreme state wherein the world is lost. Such is the teaching of our holy Guru. Here is shown that the state is one of peace because there is no duality there. This is what we learn from all the Upanishads. This teaching is further confirmed by the analogy of the dream world. As the dream world is known to be unreal for the reason that it vanishes upon waking, so this waking world is also proved to be unreal by its vanishing in the light of the real self. But ignorant men who are averse to winning the supreme state put forth an endless series of arguments, trying to refute this teaching. The sages clear the doubts generated by these arguments, so that earnest aspirants may not be deluded by them. This teaching of the unreality of the world is not addressed to those who look upon the body itself as the self, or consider the self to be the owner of the body. For these people, the world is real, not unreal. The teaching has to be adapted to the person being taught. The same teaching is not good for all. Here, it is shown that he who believes that the self is not the body, but the owner of it, or the dweller therein, is for this purpose in the same category as the one who believes the body itself to be the self. Why is it that the world is real to these people? The teaching that the Trinity of the soul, God and the world is unreal, is indivisible. If one is convinced that one of these is real, the other two also will appear to be real. That is, the teaching must either be accepted as a whole or rejected wholly. There is no option to split it up and accept it partially, rejecting some of it. To those who seek deliverance, the teaching is that all these three are equally unreal. This teaching must therefore be accepted exactly as it is taught by those who are earnestly seeking to win deliverance by the extinction of ignorance. For different aspirants, there are different paths prescribed. This particular teaching is addressed only to those who believe that for them deliverance must come by right awareness. An analogy is next given to explain the indivisibility of the teaching. One who is wise will either accept the teaching as a whole or reject the whole of it. Who can make use of half of a hen for cooking, reserving the other half for laying eggs? A hen must be killed and cooked for food, or the whole hen must be allowed to live for laying eggs. The same indivisibility is characteristic of this teaching. Now we come to a discussion of the objections of those who assert the perfect reality of the world. On what evidence do they base their belief? To begin with, it needs to be considered why the world is taken to be real. For the burden of proving the reality of the world lies on him that asserts it, not on those who simply deny it. Everyone who is ignorant of the real self thinks the world is real because it is seen. This is no proof because it proves too much. The same reason would prove the reality of the mirage, the rope in the snake. Usually, the knowledge that arises from seeing is mixed up with imagination or a false impression of what is seen. This reason is therefore inconclusive. The question then arises, what does the seeing of the world prove? The fact of being seen is not conclusive proof that the world exists exactly as imagined by the seer. From the seeing, it is proper to infer only that there is a substratum in which the world appears. In the first verse of Ulladu Narpadu, Bhagavan says, "Because we see the world, it is indisputable that there exists a first cause, substratum or basic reality, which has the power to appear as many." In the same verse, he proceeds to reveal, in the light of his own experience, that substratum is only the real self, on which are superimposed the four elements of the world appearance, the pictures of names and forms, the seeing individual soul, the screen, and the light. The seeing subject and the spectacle seen form the appearance imposed on the substratum. The lighted screen is the substratum. Here, the analogy of the cinema show is suggested. The pictures in which the seer is included come and go, but the lighted screen exists unaffected throughout. The power by which the appearance is superimposed on the substratum is known as Maya. All that is meant by calling the world an effect of Maya is that things are not what they seem to those who have not known the real self as it really is. Even scientists have proved that things are not exactly as they appear to the seer, for they say that the solid seeming objects are really little more than empty space. Atomic physics now tells us that the atom is not a solid particle, but a closed space in which electrons are rotating around a nucleus, composed of protons and neutrons, etc. The electrons rotate at different distances from the nucleus. The whole atom thus resembles a solar system. That things are not what they seem is thus indisputable. On the other hand, there is no proof that things are what they seem to be. There is, in fact, an antithesis between appearance and reality. It is this that is called Maya, which is the illusion by which reality appears as the world. That spectacle which resembles a cinema show. Due to this illusion, there is ignorance, avidya, which works through the mind that wrongly identifies the body as the self. For this reason, the truth about the world is a profound mystery, one that transcends the human intellect, but it is no mystery to the sage, who alone is competent to tell us the truth as it really is. Only the sage who knows the substratum of the world appearance, the reality, by being firmly established in the supreme state, is competent to reveal the truth of the world. By his unawareness of that truth, the common man, being a victim of his ignorance, cannot know the truth about the world. When vision is focused on the outside, who can know the truth, whether of the real self or of the world? But with the mind turned inwards, the sage knows the truth of both by the eye of right awareness. It is with the knowledge of this uniqueness of the sage that the disciple has to approach him and listen to his teaching. Bhagavan, our Guru, has said, "The world laughs at the ignorant man, saying, 'How can you know me properly unless you know yourself correctly?' By this, it is meant that the disciple must be humble, knowing the limitations of his own intelligence. Without this humility, he cannot be a true disciple. Bhagavan, our Guru, being a sage, expounds the unreality of the world by showing that the perception of the world takes place in ignorance. Therefore, the objector's argument that the world is real because he sees it does not avail to prove his contention. The ignorant man's vision of the world is vitiated by the fact of his ignorance of his own real self. This point has been repeatedly pointed out by Bhagavan. To know the world aright, one must first know oneself aright. Every creature first identifies his own self with the body and thereby concludes that the body is real. Then it comes to believe that all forms that are seen are also real. Whatever is seen is a form. The initial question, therefore, is whether forms are real. Everyone who sees comes to the conclusion that all forms are real. But the first step in the process of coming to this conclusion is the mistaken impression that the body is the self. True knowledge begins with the understanding that the body is not the self. In truth, the self is formless. So, whatever is seen is for that very reason not the self. Though the self is indubitably real, that reality is instead ascribed to the body. So, a part of the world is mistakenly concluded to be real. Therefore, all forms are unreal. To the sage, they are not real. What really exists is formless. In right awareness, nothing has form. By a single act of vision, the ignorant man sees both himself and the world as forms. Since this seeing is illusory, there is no evidence to prove that the world is real. One's own body and the world are one indivisible spectacle. Either they are both seen together or they are both not seen. Does anyone see this world without at the same time seeing the body, which is the form ascribed to the self? This fact that neither the body nor the world is seen apart from the other is something we have never noticed before. We come to know of it for the first time only when the fact is pointed out by Bhagavan. Since the self is really formless, the whole spectacle is suspect, since it is indivisible. If it is said that we see the dream world without bodies, the response is that there is a body for the soul in all the three states. The soul is never bodiless. Here, it is the soul that is spoken of, not the self. The two are not the same in Bhagavan's teachings. Every creature has three bodies, a gross one, a subtle one, and a causal one. The mind is the subtle body, and ignorance itself is called the causal body. The three bodies mentioned here are also enumerated as the 5 sheaths. The middle 3 sheaths are the same as the subtle body, and the last sheath is stated to be the causal body. The gross physical body is identical with the first of the 5 sheaths, called the food sheath, Annamaya Kosha, because it is the product of food. This, being obvious, is not stated in the verse. As long as the 3 bodies remain undissolved by the light of right awareness, the soul will be embodied. Only in the supreme state, wherein all the 3 are together lost, will there be bodilessness. The mind, by its own force of ignorance, itself creates another body and also another dream world. The sleeper who sees this dream world along with this dream body is not disembodied. Thus, the objection is overcome. Everyone sees both his own body and the world through the eye, which is a part of the very body. How can this seeing be admissible as evidence in this inquiry about the reality of the world? Since the body is a part of the world, its reality is also in question. It cannot be assumed without proof, but it is so assumed when the eye is appealed to as a witness to the truth of the world. As is the eye, so is the spectacle. Since the nature of the spectacle depends on that of the seeing eye, if that eye is a form, so will be the spectacle. But if the eye is a formless self, there will be no seeing of forms at all. This is a law of nature that Bhagavan reveals for the first time. Seeing with the eye of flesh, which is a form, one sees forms. Seeing with the eye of right awareness as the self, forms are not seen. So says Bhagavan. This proves that forms are unreal, at least for the purpose of this philosophy. In the state of ignorance, both the world and the self are seen as forms. But on the extinction of ignorance, both are found to be formless, because in the supreme state, the infinite self is the I. In the true state, which is the supreme state, the self alone is. It is described as infinite and therefore formless. There are no objects to be seen, nor is there any real seeing. Hence, forms are unreal. If they were real, they would survive in that state. By the vision of right awareness, the world, along with the soul, merges into the formless, real self. The sages call that the vision of right awareness, wherein there is neither seer nor the spectacle. In that natural state of the self, there survives only the self, which is consciousness, worldless, alone, and without the 6 modes of change, such as birth and so on. Hence, it alone is real in its own right. The world is not real in its own right. It has only a borrowed reality. That supreme being, the self, which is perfect as the sole reality, is styled the infinite I. However, because for that self, in its true state, there are no objects to be seen. It is not really an I. The term I has been used in this context by the Most Holy One, Bhagavan, only to ward off the misconception that it is non-consciousness, inert. Thus, the Most Holy One has conveyed the meaning that the self is consciousness and the soul reality. It is only by conceiving the formless self as a form that one sees this world as consisting of forms. All this is really an ignorant superimposition on the formless, infinite reality, the self. It is only to him that sees himself as having a form that the names and forms appear as real. They have been fabricated by ignorance and superimposed on the nameless, formless self, which is consciousness. Thus, it has been made plain by the Master that the seeing of the world is an effect of the primary ignorance. Thus, the claim that the world is real has been refuted by him. Also, it has been shown by him that the aloneness of the real self in the true state is real. Our Master confirms this teaching first by showing that the world is mental, inseparable from the mind, then by proving the unreality of the mind and the ego, and finally by teaching that even the primary ignorance is non-existent.